It started on a Friday night like any other. I was 17, spending the weekend at my best friend Ethan's house, a second home to me after years of sleepovers, late-night movies, and morning cereal at their kitchen counter. Ethan and I had been inseparable since 6th grade, and his family had always welcomed me without hesitation. His mom was always traveling for work, so it was mostly just Ethan and his dad, Mark Hayes. Mr. Hayes. Even now, the name lands heavy in my chest. He wasn't the typical dad I'd seen growing up. No beer belly, no receding hairline, no awkward dad joke. Mark was in his early 40s, built like he hadn't skipped a gym day in a decade. Tall, broad shoulders, sharp jawline dusted with salt and pepper stubble. His presence filled a room before he even spoke. Quiet confidence, a coolness I couldn't quite name. I didn't admit it out loud, not even to myself, but he was the first man who ever made me feel unsettled. Not unsafe, just aware. That night, Ethan and I were supposed to game until we passed out, but he ended up falling asleep first, curled into a blanket burrito on the far end of the couch. The TV buzzed low in the background, casting soft light against the dark living room. I stayed up a little longer, half watching a late-night rerun and scrolling on my phone. Mr. Hayes came downstairs around midnight, fresh out of the shower, hair damp, shirtless under a zip-up hoodie. He moved through the room like he owned every inch of it, because he did. I pretended not to notice him, but every cell in my body was on edge. "You're the last man standing, huh?" he said, his voice smooth, unhurried. I nodded, managing a smile. "Barely." He smirked and grabbed a beer from the kitchen, settling into the recliner next to the couch. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was thick, heavy. I kept my eyes on the screen, but I could feel his gaze flicking toward me occasionally. I wasn't imagining it. "So, senior year," he said after a pause. "You figuring out what comes next?" I shrugged. "College, maybe. Something out of state if I can swing it." He sipped his beer. "Get out while you can. You don't want to get stuck here like the rest of us." I glanced at him then, and his eyes locked onto mine for just a beat too long. Something unspoken passed between us, something neither of us acknowledged. "I should crash," I mumbled, tossing my phone aside and rolling onto my side. "All right," he said, voice low. "Sleep tight." I closed my eyes, heart pounding harder than it should have. But I didn't really sleep. I don't know what kept me from drifting off. Maybe it was Ethan's light snoring. Maybe it was the buzz of electricity in the room. Or maybe it was the way Mr. Hayes didn't leave. I could hear the occasional clink of his beer bottle as he sipped. The soft shifting of his weight. Every noise felt louder in the dark. I stayed still, eyes closed, breathing slow. I wasn't sure if I was pretending to sleep or testing him, or both. Minutes passed. Then I heard the recliner creak as he stood up. Bare feet against the floorboards. He moved closer. Closer. Then, silence. I could feel him hovering near me, standing just inches from where I lay. My skin burned with awareness. I kept my breathing steady, too afraid to move, too curious not to. And then, I swear, I felt it. A light touch. Just a brush of fingers across the back of my hand, like he was checking to see if I'd stir. I didn't. I couldn't. His fingers lingered, then retreated. I heard him exhale, slow and shallow. Then, finally, his footsteps padded away, up the stairs, and the house settled into silence. I opened my eyes, staring into the dim glow of the TV screen. My pulse thudded in my ears. What the hell had just happened? I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination running wild. I was exhausted. Maybe I dreamt the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't a dream. It was something. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, Ethan was his usual chaotic self, cracking jokes and tossing cereal at me across the table. Mr. Hayes was calm, collected, sipping coffee like he hadn't hovered over me in the dark just hours earlier. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. But every time our eyes met across the room, I felt it again, that unspoken pull. That line we hadn't crossed but now stood toe-to-toe with, daring each other to take the first step. And somehow I already knew, this wasn't over. The next weekend I was back at Ethan's house. I hadn't planned to be. But when he texted, asking if I wanted to hang out and chill, I said yes before thinking it through. Maybe I wanted to believe that what happened that night hadn't been real. That it was a one-time, sleep-deprived hallucination. Or maybe, on some darker level, I was hoping for a repeat. The moment I walked in, Mr. Hayes, looked up from the kitchen, mid-phone call, and gave me a nod. Just a nod. But there was something behind his eyes. A flicker. Recognition. I returned it without meaning to. Ethan was oblivious, as always, and after hours of gaming and inhaling junk food, he passed out again, half-twisted in a blanket on the floor. This time, I didn't even pretend to be interested in the TV. I laid on the couch, facing the back cushions, heart ticking like a metronome, body tight with anticipation. I waited. I wasn't asleep. But I wanted him to think I was. It wasn't long before I heard him come downstairs, barefoot again, quiet. My back was to the room, eyes closed, muscles buzzing beneath my skin. The room was dark except for the bluish flicker of the television, casting shadows on the walls like ghosts. He moved slowly, deliberately, until I could feel his presence behind me. Then stillness. Just the sound of the house humming softly, and the silence stretching long enough to make me wonder if he'd changed his mind. And then he touched me. Not a graze. Not an accident. His fingers rested gently on my upper arm, warm and heavy. He didn't move them. Just held them there like he was feeling my pulse through the skin. I froze, completely. I kept my breathing shallow and even, praying I wouldn't start shaking. "You sleep like a rock," he murmured. His voice was rougher than usual. Lower. Almost a growl. He sat down beside me, his hand sliding from my arm to my side, then to my hip. My breath caught in my throat, but I kept still. Every nerve ending in my body was a live wire. My brain screamed at me to move, to say something, to do anything, but I didn't. Because I wanted this. I'd never admit it out loud, but I craved it. Him. The attention. The danger. He leaned in close, his breath warm on my neck, lips hovering so near they brushed the skin behind my ear. And then, soft as a secret, he kissed me there. Once. Just a whisper of contact. But it ripped through me like lightning. His hand moved up, gliding beneath the edge of my shirt, fingers splaying across my stomach. He paused, fingers pressing lightly, then slid them higher, over my chest. His touch was confident. Familiar. Like he'd been here before, with others. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't stop him. He exhaled slowly, then whispered, "Still out cold, huh?" His other hand tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, lingering at my jawline before retreating. The silence between us was electric. Nothing existed beyond that couch, that room, that moment. And then, just like that, he pulled away. I heard the soft creak of the floor as he stood. No explanation. No goodbye. He disappeared back upstairs, leaving the air thick with everything unsaid. I opened my eyes to the ceiling, chest heaving now that I was alone. My skin still tingled where he'd touched me, kissed me. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What the hell was I doing? I wasn't a kid. I knew what that was. It wasn't fatherly. It wasn't innocent. It was deliberate, seductive. And I let it happen. Worse, I wanted it to happen again. The next morning, Mark acted like nothing had happened. He stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, making small talk. Ethan joked about his messed-up sleep schedule, completely unaware of what his dad had done to me just hours before. But I couldn't focus. Every word Mr. Hayes said felt loaded. Every glance he gave me across the room made my skin prickle. He was so composed, so casual. Like touching your son's best friend in the dark was just another part of his routine. And me? I was unraveling, torn between guilt and desire, shame and power. I didn't know what I was becoming, But it wasn't the boy who used to crash here for sleepovers and cartoons. Something had shifted. A door had opened, and now I couldn't close it even if I tried. The worst part? I didn't want to. A week passed, but my mind never left that living room. Every night I replayed it. His voice. His touch. That breathless second where I wasn't sure if he'd stop, or if I even wanted him to. I was hooked, completely and stupidly hooked on a man I had no business thinking about. But it wasn't just lust. It was the way he made me feel seen. Wanted. A switch had flipped, and now I couldn't go back. So when Ethan invited me over the next Friday, I didn't hesitate. I lied to myself and said I was just going to hang out with my best friend. But underneath that was something darker. Need, plain and simple. I needed to feel that again. I needed him again. Ethan met me at the door, tossing me a soda and joking about some new game we were supposed to play. I smiled, laughed at the right moments, but my focus was off. My eyes flicked toward the staircase every time I heard movement upstairs. I was restless, scanning the room even when nothing was happening. Mark came down later, wearing a gray t-shirt and joggers, looking effortlessly casual in a way that made my stomach twist. His eyes landed on me briefly, no smile, no small talk. Just a glance. But it was enough. I slept on the same couch as last time. Ethan passed out early again, sprawled out in his bedroom after downing half a pizza. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I waited, curled beneath a blanket, facing the same direction as before. I kept one hand near my mouth to fake sleep breathing. My eyes were shut, but my body buzzed with anticipation and nerve. I didn't know if he'd come. I didn't know what I'd do if he didn't. But he did. Sometime past midnight, I heard the floor creak. His steps were careful, but not tentative. Deliberate. He stood behind me again. Same position, same tension. And then, softly, "Still can't sleep?" I didn't respond. He didn't expect me to. His hand touched my shoulder, then slid slowly across my chest beneath the blanket. He moved closer this time. No hesitation. His body pressed against my back, solid and warm, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing against me. This time, I didn't fake being asleep. I tilted my head slightly. Not much. Just enough. He took it as a signal. His lips brushed my neck, trailing up toward my jaw. I turned toward him instinctively, and suddenly our mouths were touching, tentative at first, then deeper, urgent. It wasn't tender. It was hungry. He pulled the blanket aside and slipped beneath it with me. His hands roamed like he had every right to explore, and I let him. I wanted him to. His body was firm, confident, experienced. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty. He knew exactly how to make me feel out of control. And in that moment, I wanted to be owned. He kissed me again, longer this time, and I melted into it. My hands gripped his shirt, desperate to anchor myself to something. To him. To this feeling. To not being invisible for once. He didn't rush. He took his time, teasing, tasting, learning me like a secret he planned to keep. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy. It was quiet. Controlled. Like the silence somehow made it more sacred, or maybe just easier to pretend it wasn't happening. Eventually, he pulled back just enough to speak. "You okay?" That simple question undid me more than anything else. I nodded. My voice failed, so I whispered, "Yeah." He lingered, his forehead pressed against mine, fingers tracing circles on my skin. It was intimate in a way that terrified me. Because it didn't feel like a hookup. It didn't feel like some perverted thrill. It felt personal. And that scared the hell out of me. He exhaled softly. "This stays between us. You understand." I nodded again. He kissed me once more, slow and deep, then slipped away. Just like before. Only this time it felt different. This time I didn't feel used. I felt claimed. When I woke the next morning, Ethan was in the kitchen, ranting about his dream and pouring cereal like nothing in the world had changed. Mr. Hayes stood at the counter, fully dressed, focused on his phone. His face was unreadable, calm. Like he hadn't kissed me senseless just hours before. Like we hadn't crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He didn't acknowledge me beyond a simple morning. I sat at the table, barely touching my food, adrenaline still humming beneath my skin. That morning didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't stop. When dawn finally broke over Ethan's house that morning, the weight of what had transpired pressed upon me like a secret too heavy to bear. I sat at the kitchen table, the early sunlight slicing through the blinds, illuminating the conflicting emotions writ large on my face. Ethan was already up, bright and chatty as he recounted his bizarre dream while preparing cereal. His laughter danced in the background, a stark contrast to the turmoil coursing through my veins. Mr. Hayes, Mark, as I now dared to think of him privately, moved with an unruffled composure in the adjacent room. He sipped his coffee silently, his eyes occasionally meeting mine with the cool detachment of a man who had already moved on to the next chapter of his day. The casual normalcy was a cruel reminder that, despite our clandestine encounter, nothing had changed in their world, while mine was forever altered. I was left to wrestle with the duality of my desires, the intoxicating allure of forbidden passion and the bitter sting of guilt. Each memory of the midnight touches clashed with the memories of the innocent sleepovers we once shared. How had everything spiraled so far from the boy who once craved nothing more than camaraderie and adventure? Now, every thought was consumed by the echo of those stolen kisses and the tender cruelty of his gaze. I tried to commit the experience to memory, the gentle press of his hand along my skin, the heat that surged from his whispered words, and the way his eyes seemed to look beyond me, reading my very soul. But with each recollection came a sharper awareness of the betrayal etched into the fabric of our lives. Ethan, my friend, never suspected that his steady presence had been the backdrop for my unraveling. And Mark, whose authority and control felt as immutable as the laws of nature, now held power over my heart in ways I couldn't comprehend. The days that followed were filled with a haunting duality. By daylight, I played the role of the dependable friend, sharing laughter at the breakfast table and nodding along as Ethan recounted trivial plans for the future. But at night, solitude became an oppressive canvas for my tangled thoughts. I revisited that night relentlessly, as though each moment could be replayed and perhaps understood anew. In the quiet hours, my mind was a battlefield where longing and regret waged a constant war. My internal conflict deepened with every clandestine glance from Mark. At times, he spoke in measured tones that belied the passion we had shared. Other days, his silence was an accusation. I began to see him in a new light, not just as Ethan's father or a symbol of the forbidden, but as a man whose inner life was as inscrutable as it was alluring. His calm demeanor in the public eye only magnified the intensity of what lurked beneath, a passion that could both empower and destroy. I found myself questioning where responsibility lay. Was I to blame for succumbing to a desire that I'd long suppressed, or was it Mark's calculated seduction that had awakened something in me? Every time I stood alone in that silent room after Ethan had left for the day, guilt mingled with a strange, addictive yearning. I saw every bruised thought as a badge of both shame and truth. I was no longer the innocent boy I once was. The inevitable confrontation with reality loomed closer each day. I knew that the lingering tension with Mark would eventually demand an explanation, one that neither of us was truly prepared to give. And Ethan, blissfully unaware, continued to hold our family together with his carefree humor, even as my soul decayed behind his trusting eyes. The gulf between us was deepening, filled with unsaid words and forbidden memories. I felt like an interloper in my own life, caught in a limbo between the safety of friendship and the perilous allure of passion. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch, the cool breeze offering a brief relief from the stifling turmoil within. I'd replay our encounters in my mind, trying desperately to reconcile who I was with who I was becoming. The touch of Mark's hand was no longer just a memory, it was a promise, a pact that our darkness was as valid as any other desire. But it came with a high cost. Each recollection was laced with the agony of knowing that some boundaries, once crossed, could never be retracted. The girl, no, the youth, who once believed in simplistic truths was now burdened with the sophistication of guilt. I began to question the nature of consent and the blurred lines between power and vulnerability. The more I dwelt on it, the more I saw that our encounter was less about a moment of weakness and more about the intoxicating interplay of need and control. Mark had a presence that disarmed my hesitation, and I craved that sensation even as it threatened to overwhelm me. There was beauty in the brutality of our connection, a harsh truth that love and desire are never absolutes. Now, every interaction with Mark carries an undercurrent of unspoken promises and peril. The fallout of that forbidden night isn't confined to the hours we spent together, it's woven into every moment thereafter. A part of me longs for more, while another part trembles at the cost. I am adrift between worlds, the safe space of routine and the irresistible call of the unknown. As I fold another day into memory, the questions remain: what have I lost, and what might I gain if I continue down this treacherous path? I haven't found the answers yet, but I know one immutable truth: nothing will ever be the same again. Standing on the precipice of this new reality, I sense that the journey ahead will challenge every notion of right and wrong. And while the taste of his kiss still lingers, I must reckon with the undeniable fact that every step forward is both a defiance and an admission of irreparable change. I close my eyes, absorbing the quiet pulse of the morning, and brace myself for a day filled with uncertain questions and the echo of a night that refuses to be forgotten.